I have a thought experiment for you. There's a scientist who's the world's leading expert on sight. She's so brilliant that she's able to successfully correct vision for people who are blind. In fact, she's the first person to undergo the procedure herself, having been born blind. The question is, when the bandages are removed and she sees the world for the first time, the green grass, the blue sky, does she learn anything new? Despite being the world's leading expert on vision, does being able to see for the first time change how she understands eyesight? In other words, does experience count as a form of knowledge?
One of the first things you notice as we've adopted this paradigm of care and medicate more people is that the burden of mental illness in our society doesn't go down, it's gone up and up and up. And particularly in the last 30 years, as measured by people on disability, the number of people on disability is just soaring.
For the vast majority of the history of psychiatry, we didn't tell people that they had a mental illness. We didn't tell people that they have a condition that we call schizophrenia or psychosis. And then we turn around and blame them for not having insight into something we'd never educated them about. And by the time somebody starts to have the symptoms of a mental illness, they've already grown up in a culture in which there's a tremendous amount of stigma and discrimination against people with mental illness. So who would want to accept that you're part of that group that everybody shuns?
But by the time I went back to the hospital for the third time is when I finally found out what this diagnosis meant. I asked the psychiatrist I was working with, what do I have? He said schizophrenia. And I said, well, what does that mean? He said, you have to avoid stress. You can't go back to school. You can't work. You need to just avoid stress, and you really have to take this medicine every single day. And basically that was what I've come to call the prognosis of doom. That's what was going to happen for my life, according to the professionals. And it was a very heavy thing to be told that, because I was all of 18 by then, right? And to see your future evaporate is a terrifying thing. I just remember at one appointment when he was telling me yet again that I needed to avoid stress and not try to go back to school and not try to get a job and not try to get a driver's license. Don't do these things. These cause stress. You have a vulnerability to stress. You just have to avoid stress. And he didn't realize the boredom was completely stressful. And so I just remember this thing coming up over the top of the deadening effect of the Haldol, and it was outrage. It was angry indignation. You are wrong about me. Now, I knew better than to, express that openly in that moment to him, because that would have been seen as part of my illness, right? I'm lacking impulse control. I'm getting angry at a psychiatrist. But I knew, you're wrong about me. You lack insight into me.
One study tracked down 200 people who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia some 30 years previously. Of these, 20% were doing well at the time of the follow-up, while 45% were incapacitated. 2/3 had never married, and 58% had never worked. In light of these grim statistics, we can only hope that the odds will improve as researchers converge on the etiology, the cause of the disease, and perfect new treatments. Right. What they're saying is, you're doomed if you have it, and the only hope that will change is if science can find out what the biological cause of the disease is, and then cure that cause with some sort of chemical treatment. Those of us that have been diagnosed with schizophrenia and have lived the living hell that it can be, who've gone on to develop the life that we want, know that recovery is so much more than about just a chemical correction.
I always start out by trying to figure out where you're from. How many here from Western New York, Buffalo? Yeah! We are living examples of recovery. Our story is real and true. We recover. Contrary to what they told us, we can recover, we can work, we can have families, we can live independently, right? But we have faith in recovery, we have hope, we have each other, we have peer support, we have services that help us, and we need them to be strong, but the public needs to understand.
There have been numerous studies that have shown that if you ask clinicians what people with mental illnesses need, they will list treatment first, and they might talk about jobs or housing fourth or fifth down the list. If you ask people with mental illnesses what they need, treatment usually ends up about 10th. There are things like housing, employment, income, friends, sex. There's all kinds of things people need help with that don't have strictly to do with the illness per se. But we've had this notion that if you treat the illness, all the rest will come. But all people hear about that is we're only interested in them because they're sick. We're not interested in their interests. We're not interested in their needs. We're not interested in their having a home and something meaningful to do during the day and friendship and romance and the things people want.
Here to talk about employment is our co-president, Maura Kelly.
Are you guys getting psyched to see your legislators? I'm very passionate about employment. My agency, Mental Health Peer Connection, has a great employment program where we get 40% of the people of the 300 we serve employment.
Mental Health Peer Connection's been around for a while now, and it's a really outstanding organization. And I happened to be reading a newsletter, and it had a link to this article by this woman named Maura Kelly. And it was about her vision that people diagnosed with mental disorders can and should go back to work. And I think peer support is key to doing that. I think until you can see it with your own eyes, when you can see somebody who's running their own micro-enterprise, who has gone back to work and now has their own health insurance, until you see it with your own eyes, you almost can't believe it's true.
Mental Health Peer Connection is part of the family of agencies of the Western New York Independent Living. Basically, the independent living is a movement to help people with disabilities live as independently as possible in the community through deinstitutionalization, community living, and self-sufficiency in the community. And everyone that works at Mental Health Peer Connection has been labeled with a psychiatric disability. And our perspective is a little bit different in the provider community in that we've been there. We are them and they are us. And that's what we're all about.
People always want to say what you need instead of asking what you want. And as a peer, I get a chance to ask people what they want.
Being able to be a peer, I'm able to share, my experiences, my successes, my failures.
What I found was, in my experience, was being diagnosed with a serious mental illness. People started looking at me differently, treating me differently. People thought that they knew best what I needed, and then people also looked at me like I was limited in what I could accomplish. And it was really hard not to believe that about myself when everybody else, including the people that were helping me, believe that about me. And so for me, my recovery didn't start until I was in the hospital at ECMC, and a peer came in and worked for Mental Health Peer Connection and told me about their recovery and about the amazing things that they were able to do once they sort of started to believe in themselves. So things didn't get better for me until sort of the hope and the empowerment that was provided here became available to me.
Choice and empowerment play a key role in recovery and in what we do at Mental Health Peer Connection. A lot of times people are so institutionalized, they want us to make the decisions about their lives, and we help empower them, give them power to decide what they want to do.
Project Code, like I said, Project Code was a beautiful place. Remind me of this one.
Okay, what about this place?
This
helped you?
And
how's it different?
How different from Project Code?
From the psychiatric.
For the psychiatrist okay, can I go to the bathroom now? Can I get up and go outside? I can do what I want to do.
I had to let the people around me, my peer, my coworkers, my family, empower me. I had to realize that I had something in me that was highly motivated to change myself, to change my life. And I started learning about what empowerment is, and that is being able to utilize my own devices, to be able to nurture myself and take care of myself and to heal. And that worked.
So what is quite clear in terms of solutions is if you have a form of care that helps bring that person out of that isolation and helps them build bridges back to others, friends, family, and gives them a place in society, okay? Especially a place with some meaning, jobs. What do we need to be well? You have people to love you, and then also some wellness things, health, physical exercise, etc. If we have a care that takes that person in this difficult time and stays with them some time. In other words, none of this is going to be repaired in 4 days, right? It takes time if you have someone who goes into a psychotic episode to help them get their place back in the world.
Recovery means different things for each and every one of us. For me, recovery means relationships with my family, home ownership, employment, but that might not be the definition for someone else labeled with a mental illness. They might have a different idea of what recovery means to them. And we are each individuals, and my recovery might not be the same as someone else's recovery. This is my refrigerator. When I was in federal housing, I had one of those little refrigerators that college kids have, and that was the only refrigerator. Today, I have a regular size refrigerator with a freezer. It's not one of those containers, and that makes me very grateful. Every time I use a refrigerator, I think I'm glad I'm not in federal housing, and I have my own refrigerator, regular size. And this is my living room, and I have my TV, and if you've noticed, my walls are orange. I like orange. I didn't have to ask the landlord to paint my house. I wanted orange, and that's what I got. Every day the light comes in and makes the orange a little different, and it's cheery. And I can look at outside my backyard, and I don't have anyone living above me, below me, next to me. It's my own house, so I don't have to worry about walking around making noise for the people downstairs or the people upstairs making noise. This is all my house, and I can blast the music as loud as I want and do whatever I want here.
I have to make a side journey here. I'm debating this guy named DJ Jaffe. You can boo if you want to. You don't even know why you're booing, I'll tell you why. He is the lead person to push forced treatment in this state. We were debating the other day, and he said, oh, NIAPers, they don't want to work. They're not really the people that have had serious problems. They're just people that are kind of better off, and they don't represent the really people that really struggle, high needs people, people that really, their people are all recovering. And they don't want to work with hard people, people that have had difficulty. Well, you just said you're people that have had difficulty, and you're in recovery. So I just need to know that. I need, wherever movies have been taken and pictures have been taken, we need to show these people we're not just this little ribbon of people that are doing well. We started out here, and grace of God and all your good work, you've come as far as you have.
What I know about DJ Jaffe is that he's an individual who leads an organization called Mental Illness Policy. He has basically been on a crusade for a number of years to force individuals with mental illnesses, as a matter of public policy, to take medication. His group and other groups that he's associated with have been really successful in getting states, New York was the first state, to pass laws that allowed courts to order people to have to take psychiatric medications while living in the community.
It's essentially a law that forces people into psychiatric treatment whether they want it or not. And there are groups in New York State that are fighting to have that law expanded so that perhaps hundreds of thousands of people in New York are forced to have to take whatever psychiatric medications a doctor says while living in their own home.
I don't think it's right because everybody not the same. Sometimes they don't really, not able to really watch you on it. They just give it to you at the time being when you're in the hospital, and they're not seeing what the side effects and stuff are.
They may be able to function without this medicine. Maybe they do need to see a psychiatrist, but maybe they don't need the medicine. And to force them to take it, just taking away their will.
Forced outpatient psychiatric treatment does violence by essentially violating the fundamental self-evident right to determine what happens to my body. That is akin to a kind of rape, and it is a form of violence. And when you talk to people who have been stripped of their civil liberties and confined against their will and drugged forcibly against their will, they will use the language of rape to describe the experience. It is traumatic. People don't come out of that saying thank you.
They taking everything, they got you zombilized. These medications, they zombalize you, have you stiff, messed up, completely messed up. You all, whereas you need to say something, but you can't even talk because your jaws is locked up and you done chewed out your teeth. And they steady talking about relax. How am I relaxing? You done gave me Haldol and Prolixin, and I got to brush my teeth like this.
As we as a society, as we embrace, forced outpatient treatment, and we do this through our legislatures, what is our societal context for such laws? A is that the people are dangerous, right, if they don't take their medication, and therefore, from a sort of social control point of view, it's worthwhile to have forced outpatient treatment. And two is that the drugs are a necessary good. What I think legislatures need to understand, and what societies need to understand, is science does not support this belief, this notion that these drugs are necessarily good for people.
These are people who necessarily were never violent. You don't have to have ever had been violent in order to have the court order you to take medicine. Just actually not wanting to have taken the medicine that a psychiatrist wanted to prescribe you, and having been in the hospital 1 or 2 times is enough to qualify a person to be, this is how he describes it, a potential threat to national security. He's written a series of essays that have essentially equated people who refuse psychiatric treatment to terrorists, that mental illness is a national security risk.
The media tends to still talk about mental patients who go berserk, who shoot Congress people, or who kill their parents, or they focus on the sensational, rare but sensational events, and the media portrayals are still predominantly biased toward people not being successful, effective citizens.
Because that violence card is completely unfounded by facts. You know, I think, that we are 12 times more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators, than the public. And that we are no more, let's hear this.
I'm not a threat!
I don't want to hurt anybody.
I don't want to hurt anybody by any means!
This has been the worst sort of crucible of public discussion. We had the tragedy in Newtown, right? Do you know they still haven't proven that he has a mental illness in the way that maybe some of us do? Doesn't matter, does it? They connected.
If you only looked at risk factors for violence, we would be arresting all young white men in Texas who drive pickup trucks. They are much more at risk for violence than a person with a mental illness. So if we're just a matter of community safety, we're looking in the wrong place.
These are powerful forms of distress that often, particularly in the early months and years, can be very overwhelming. I liken it to what, entering psychosis as to, it must be like, to me it was like landing on a different planet. The rules didn't apply. I couldn't find my way. I was overwhelmed by experiences that I had never had before. I didn't know how to manage it. I truly needed and wanted help. I wanted to be relieved of this terror. I didn't want to be drugged into oblivion, which initiated its own kind of distress. So I think ideally we have to be striving for a very humanized method of helping, not hurting people. And there is a big difference. I don't believe violence heals.
Choice should be a way of life for everyone. If a person chooses not to do something because they don't want to, even if it's beneficial for them, you got to let them go through what they need to go through. Sometimes you can't take away consequences.
Why are we going? Involuntary outpatient treatment. The Senate and the legislators want to extend that. So right now, you can be forced into treatment for 6 months, and then they have to reevaluate you. They want to make it a year. Okay? That's the big one. 2, this gun control thing. They're blaming the shootings on mentally ill people, all of us. And we need to show them that we're not these crazy people. We have a mental illness, or we've been diagnosed with a mental illness, and we vote, and we are concerned about how the media is portraying us. Legislator, can you help us with that image? There's a saying, not about us without us, and we need to have a voice in the politics of our state and our country. And getting up at 2:30 in the morning and driving to Albany at 3:30 in the morning to rally and to go see our legislators and say, look, I'm a person with a mental illness, I vote, and this issue matters to me.
Don't criminalize my community! Don't criminalize my community! Don't criminalize my community! Don't criminalize my
Recovery doesn't mean going back to who I used to be, but that recovery really is a transformational kind of journey where new doors are opening all the time, and we say yes or no to those directions in our lives.
We as a community decided in the 1970s that having a disability should not limit a person's access to community life. And that's why we cut curbs and sidewalks and have wheelchair access and have wider doors, and we have handicap accessible bathrooms. The reason we have all those things, and braille signs on elevators, the reason we have all those things is because as a society we decided that having a disability should not mean that the person could not do everything everyone else could do, could not have as normal a life as possible. That same perspective with the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990 said those same provisions need to be provided with persons with mental illnesses and addictions. That just having a mental illness should no longer confine you to a life in the shadows, on the margins of community life, but you have a right to be here along with everybody else. You are welcome here as a valued member of our community, and we will help you figure out what supports or accommodations you need to be able to do all those things you want to do.
This is my question that I have for psychiatrists and psychologists. This is a question I have for the experts in the field. I guess what makes your scientific knowledge, or your attempt at obtaining scientific knowledge about mental illnesses, the expert opinion, versus the people whose lives are defined by those illnesses and who actually experience them? My question is, in experiencing an illness and learning how to overcome it, learning how to grow through it, grow with it, live with it, how does that count as knowledge? Does that count as knowledge? Or do people's experiences with the illnesses of their mind not count as expert?